Howdy there, folks. Where are you tuning in from today? In this video, I'm going to tell you about a sarcastic, twisted little drama straight out of the Wild West. Last night, Jack Short Shot Malloy locked up his dusty saloon on the edge of Dusty Creek Avenue, figuring the night would slip by quiet as an old hound dog under the porch. But then came a knock. 3 cowboys, broke as a busted fence, full of tall tales and thirsty enough to drink the river dry. A friendly card game turned into a shouting match, a ridiculous bet, and a few signatures on a strange-looking document. By sunrise, Jack owned 3 ranches, though the only thing he'd ever managed was a whiskey barrel and a set of wobbly bar stools. Now he's got land, trouble, and a whole line of folks eager to help. Stick around. You'll want to hear how this mess unfolded. Jack Malloy slid the heavy latch across the saloon doors, the wood groaning in protest like it had been asked to work overtime. The last patron had stumbled out an hour ago, leaving behind the sour smell of whiskey, cigar smoke, and bad decisions. Jack stretched his back, thinking about how the evening had been nothing special, just another slow Tuesday in Dusty Creek, the kind where even the flies seemed too bored to bother buzzing. He wiped down the bar with a rag that had seen better days, muttering to himself that routine wasn't the worst thing in the world. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud, just steady, like someone who knew they weren't supposed to be there but had nothing better to do. Jack considered ignoring it, but curiosity, and the faint hope it might be someone bringing him a bottle instead of asking for one, got the better of him. Standing outside were 3 familiar shapes. Rusty Flynn, whose mouth moved faster than his brain ever could. Cole Henderson, wearing that permanent scowl that made folks wonder if he'd ever seen a sunrise worth remembering. And Pete Sanders, round as a rain barrel, breathing like he just raced the train into town. Rusty leaned on the doorframe like it was holding him upright. "Jack, we were just thinking, what's a Tuesday without a little game to keep it interesting?" His tone was the kind of casual that usually meant trouble. Jack smirked. "Game? Rusty, the last time you boys played cards in here, I had to replace a table, 3 chairs, and a man's teeth. And I'm not talking about mine." Cole grunted. "This'll be different. Just a few hands for fun." Pete wheezed a laugh. "We even brought our own deck." Jack glanced at the clock, then at their faces. He could lock the door and walk upstairs to his small, quiet room. Or he could take a seat, pour around, and see where the night might go. The trouble with choices, Jack thought, was that sometimes the wrong one felt a whole lot more entertaining. "All right," he said, stepping back from the door. "But if someone ends up missing an ear this time, it's not going on my tab." The 3 men shuffled in, boots scuffing the warped floorboards, the air already changing, heavier, unpredictable. Jack poured the first round, telling himself it was just a harmless way to kill an hour. He didn't know yet that the hour would stretch into a lifetime of headaches. The first few hands went the way they always did. Cheap laughs, cheaper whiskey, and stakes so small they could barely trip over a boot. Rusty tossed in a pouch of tobacco. Cole pushed forward a half-empty bottle of rotgut. Pete bet a sack of beans, swearing they were worth more than gold if you knew how to cook them right. Jack played along, sipping slow, letting the cards fall as they may. He'd seen these men bluff over less, and he wasn't about to get reeled in. But something in the air shifted after the 4th hand. Rusty, grinning like a fox that had just spotted a lazy chicken, reached into his coat and slapped down a folded piece of paper. "Let's make this interesting," he said. Jack raised an eyebrow. "You offering your poetry collection?" Cole leaned forward, the lamplight cutting across his hard jaw. "That there's the deed to my south pasture. Best grazing land this side of the river." Pete dug into his vest pocket and dropped 2 more folded documents onto the pile. "And that's my claim, plus Rusty's. Between the 3, you're looking at enough land to ride a whole day across." Jack stared at the stack. It was ridiculous, absurd. He laughed out loud, certain they were bluffing or just too deep in their cups to know what they were doing. "You boys drunk enough to bet your livelihoods, or sober enough to regret it later?" Rusty shrugged. "Cards on the table, Jack. We're just here to see if Lady Luck still favors you." He should have walked away, he knew it, but Jack had never been much for sensible decisions when the whiskey was warm and the company was stupid enough to make mistakes. He tossed in the key to the saloon as his buy-in. "Purely for the story," he said. The room got quieter after that. The shuffling of cards seemed louder, the scrape of boots against the floor more deliberate. With each hand, the pot grew heavier and the laughter thinned out. By the time the next deal came around, Jack realized the line between a joke and a mistake had already been crossed. The whiskey kept flowing, and so did the cards. By the sixth hand, the air was thick with cigar smoke and bad judgment. Rusty's grin had started to twitch. Cole's jaw was locktight, and Pete looked like he was calculating how many beans he'd have to sell to buy back his land. Jack leaned back in his chair, fanning out his cards. He wasn't sure if it was luck, skill, or just the fact that these three were playing like men trying to impress a ghost. But the chips and papers kept sliding his way. The pile in front of him was starting to look like trouble dressed up as opportunity. Rusty tried to bluff on a weak hand, but Jack called it without hesitation. Cole slammed his palm on the table, rattling the glasses. Pete muttered something about never trusting a man who pours his own drinks. Then came the final hand of the night. The pot was already stacked high with the deeds, the tobacco, the bottle, and whatever pride they had left. Jack glanced at his cards and knew this was it. A straight flush stared back at him like a sheriff ready to haul someone in. "Call," Jack said, pushing the rest of his stack forward. Rusty laid down 2 pairs. Cole showed a weak full house. Pete just groaned and tossed his hand face down. Jack spread his cards across the table, slow and deliberate. Rusty's eyes went wide. Cole cursed under his breath. Pete reached for his glass. "Well," Jack said, voice casual, "looks like the land's mine now." They laughed at first, that bitter, half-drunken kind of laugh that pretends not to care. Rusty scrawled his name on the documents with a shaky hand. Cole and Pete followed suit, the ink blotting on the rough paper. "To Jack Malloy," Rusty said, raising his glass, "owner of more dirt than sense." They clinked their drinks, and for a moment it felt like nothing more than another tall tale for the bar room. Jack had no idea that by morning the joke would be on him. Morning sunlight stabbed through the gap in the saloon's curtains like it had a personal grudge. Jack groaned, rolling over on the narrow bed upstairs, his head pounding hard enough to knock sense out of a preacher. The taste in his mouth was somewhere between cheap tobacco and last night's bad decisions. A knock at the door made him sit up. Not the slow, lazy knock of a drunk, but sharp and official. Jack pulled on his boots, cursed under his breath, and shuffled downstairs. Standing in the doorway was Harvey Milton, the town's only notary, wearing his usual look of someone who enjoyed telling folks things they didn't want to hear. In his hand was a neat stack of papers, bound with twine. "Morning, Jack," Harvey said with the satisfaction of a man who'd already had breakfast and a good laugh. "Just here to certify the transfer of property from Flynn, Henderson, and Sanders to one Jack Malloy. All signed, witnessed, and legal as church on Sunday." Jack stared at him. "You're telling me those drunken fools actually signed over their land?" "Afraid so," Harvey replied. "And I'm here to make sure you can't weasel out of it. Congratulations. You're now the proud owner of 3 fine pieces of Dusty Creek real estate." Before Jack could close the door, 2 townsfolk strolled up, Old Man Grady and Sarah the dressmaker. Both offered congratulations, though their smiles were more curious than kind. Grady asked if Jack planned to sell. Sarah wanted to know if he needed someone to help manage the books. By the time Harvey left, Jack had a headache from more than just the whiskey. He poured himself a strong coffee and sat at the bar, staring at the papers like they were wanted posters with his own face on them. Owning land was never part of the plan. Land meant taxes. Land meant upkeep. Land meant neighbors who cared about where your fence started and ended. Jack had always liked the freedom of a man whose only property fit behind a bar counter. Now, thanks to one stupid night and a lucky hand, that freedom was gone. In its place stood 3 ranches and a whole town watching to see what he'd do next. By midday, word had spread faster than a brush fire in August. Jack hadn't even finished his second coffee when the saloon doors creaked open, and in walked Sheriff Bill Carter, an old friend, or as close to a friend as a lawman ever was to a saloon keeper. Bill leaned against the bar, eyeing Jack with a grin that said he'd been waiting all morning for this moment. "Heard you traded whiskey for land last night. Smart move, or the dumbest thing you ever did. Still deciding." Jack poured him a shot. "I'm leaning toward dumb." Before Bill could answer, 2 more men wandered in. Amos Tate, who owned the ranch just north of town, tipped his hat. "If you're looking to sell that south pasture, I'd make a fair offer." Behind him came Jasper Lowe, a banker with the charm of a rattlesnake. "Or," Jasper said, "you could take a loan against it. Invest in some improvements." Jack didn't miss the way both of them glanced at each other, already sizing up who'd get to pick his bones first. "Gentlemen," he said, "I haven't even seen the place yet. Let's save the picking over my corpse until I'm in the ground." They laughed politely, but Jack could feel the weight of their interest. Land wasn't just dirt. It was leverage, reputation, and power. Owning it made you somebody worth watching. By the time the sheriff left, Jack had a list of names in his head. People who wanted something from him, people who thought they could talk him into parting with what he'd accidentally won. He leaned back against the bar, running a hand over his face. "Bill," he called after the sheriff, "what's the going rate for peace and quiet these days?" Bill chuckled on his way out. "More than you can afford, Jack. More than you can afford." The next afternoon, Jack was polishing glasses behind the bar when the saloon doors swung open with a bang. In walked Rusty Flynn, Cole Henderson, and Pete Sanders. No smiles this time, no drunken swagger. Their boots hit the floor like hammers and the air in the room tightened. Rusty was first to speak, his voice a notch lower than usual. "Jack, about last night. We've been talking. Things got out of hand." Jack kept his eyes on the glass in his hand. "Out of hand? You mean the part where you bet your land and lost? Or the part where you signed the deeds over in front of a notary?" Cole stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the bar. "You know damn well it wasn't a fair game. We'd had too much to drink, and you took advantage." Jack set the glass down, leaning his elbows on the bar. "If I remember right, Cole, you poured half those drinks yourself, and if I were taking advantage, I'd have taken your boots too." Pete tried a softer approach. "Look, Jack, we can make this right. You give the deeds back, no hard feelings, or we buy 'em back. Say, a fair price, considering." Jack shook his head slowly. "You boys want me to believe 3 grown men, seasoned enough to know better, suddenly turned into wide-eyed greenhorns after a few glasses of whiskey? That's a stretch even for this town." Rusty's jaw tightened. "We're giving you a chance to avoid trouble." Jack smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Funny thing about trouble. It's like whiskey. Sooner or later it comes knocking, whether you invite it or not." The 3 of them exchanged a look, some silent agreement passing between them. Cole finally spoke. "Fine, have it your way, but don't say we didn't warn you." They turned and left, the doors swinging shut behind them. Jack stood there for a long moment, listening to the quiet settle back in. He had the uneasy sense that whatever came next wouldn't be decided over cards. It happened 2 nights later, long after the saloon had gone quiet. Jack was upstairs, counting coins, and trying to decide if owning land made him richer or just more exhausted, when he heard a faint creak below. Not the wind, not the building settling. This was boots on floorboards. He grabbed the shotgun from behind the door and moved down the stairs slow, each step deliberate. The lamplight from the bar flickered just enough to cast long shadows, and there they were, Rusty, Cole, and Pete, hunched over the safe in the corner like schoolboys caught in the pantry. "Well, well," Jack said, voice calm. "If you boys wanted a drink, all you had to do was ask." Rusty froze, his hand halfway to the safe. Cole spun, iron already in hand. Pete's eyes darted to the back door. "This isn't your fight, Jack," Cole said. "Just hand over the papers, and we'll be on our way." Jack stepped forward, keeping the shotgun low but ready. "The problem is, fellas, everything in that safe has my name on it now. You take those papers, and I'm just a man with a bar again. And that's a step backwards I'm not taking." Rusty tried to edge toward the door, but Jack caught the motion. "Don't!" Cole's patience snapped first. He raised his revolver, and the next seconds blurred into instinct. Jack dropped behind the bar as a shot tore through a row of glasses. He fired back, the blast from the shotgun rattling the walls. Pete yelped, clutching his arm as splinters flew from the doorframe. Rusty dove for cover, cursing under his breath. Cole fired again, the bullet thudding into the shelf behind Jack. Jack pumped the shotgun, stepped out from cover, and aimed square at the table between them. The blast sent cards, bottles, and half the night's quiet straight to hell. That was enough. Rusty grabbed Pete, and they stumbled toward the back door. Cole hesitated, eyes locked with Jack's, then lowered his gun and backed away. When the saloon finally fell silent again, Jack stood there, heart pounding, shotgun smoking. The safe was still locked, the papers were still his, for now. By morning, the story was all over Dusty Creek. Some said Jack had shot the lamp clean off the ceiling. Others swore he'd held 3 men at gunpoint with nothing but a glare. Jack didn't bother correcting anyone. Let the rumors run wild. They might scare off the next fool with ideas. Still, he knew better than to think it was over. Rusty, Cole, and Pete weren't the type to lick their wounds and disappear. If anything, last night had only made them meaner. Jack decided to shore up his position. He sent word to 2 old acquaintances, Caleb Hart, a wiry ranch hand who'd worked more fences than most men had seen, and Silas Boone, a retired bounty hunter with eyes like cold iron. By sundown, both were in the saloon, sipping whiskey and listening to Jack lay out the situation. 3 men, Jack said, angry, armed, and stupid enough to keep trying. "I don't want trouble, but I'm not about to hand over my land." Silas grunted. "Sounds like you already have trouble, Jack. All we're deciding is whether it's going to be short or long." Caleb chuckled. Either way, I get paid, right? Jack spent the next 2 days riding out to each of the ranches, taking stock. The south pasture was wide and green, perfect for cattle. The east spread had a small creek running through it, worth more than gold come summer. The third was rough, rocky land, but it sat high, giving a clear view of the whole valley. Word came by the third day. Cole Henderson had been seen at the far end of town, cleaning his revolver and telling anyone who'd listen that Jack Malloy's time was almost up. Jack didn't flinch. Let him talk, he told Silas. But if he calls me out, I'll be ready. The paces between them were getting shorter with each passing hour, and Jack could feel the town holding its breath. Dusty Creek had seen its share of shootouts, but there was a certain electricity in the air now, the kind that told everyone something big was about to happen. The challenge came at high noon, though everyone knew it wouldn't happen until the sun touched the horizon. Cole Henderson sent word through a kid who ran errands for the blacksmith. Main Street, sunset, no second chances. By late afternoon, Dusty Creek felt like it had stopped breathing. Shopkeepers closed early, shutters creaked shut, and folks lined the edges of the street. The golden light stretched long shadows across the dust, and every bootstep sounded louder than it should. Jack stepped out of the saloon wearing his black vest, hat pulled low, revolver riding easy at his hip. Silas walked beside him until they reached the street, then stopped. You know, Silas said, there's no shame in walking away from a fight you didn't start. Jack gave a thin smile. Maybe, but I've got 3 ranches and a point to make. Cole was already there, waiting dead center. Rusty stood off to the side, watching with a mix of nerves and hope. Pete wasn't in sight, probably still nursing his wounded arm. The 2 men faced each other, the space between them heavy with silence. A stray breeze kicked up a swirl of dust, and someone coughed near the feed store. You could have handed the deeds back, Jack, Cole called out. Could have avoided all this. Could have, Jack said. But then I wouldn't have the pleasure of watching you lose twice. A murmur ran through the crowd. Cole's hand twitched toward his holster, and Jack shifted his weight, feeling the sun at his back. The moment stretched, just long enough for the tension to burn into memory. Then Cole moved. It was fast, faster than most men could follow, but Jack had been ready. His revolver cleared leather and fired in one smooth motion. The crack split the evening air. Cole staggered, his gun firing wild into the dirt before he dropped to one knee. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Rusty rushed forward, grabbing Cole under the arm and dragging him back. This ain't over, Jack, Rusty said, his voice shaking. You hear me? Not over. Jack holstered his gun, eyes never leaving them until they disappeared down the alley. The crowd began to disperse, talking low, the way folks do when they've just seen something they'll tell and retell for years. Silas stepped up beside him. You're still standing. That's worth something. Jack glanced toward the horizon, where the last edge of the sun dipped below the hills. Yeah, he said, but I've got a feeling standing's only going to get harder from here. The next morning, the saloon was quieter than usual. Even the regulars seemed content to nurse their drinks in silence, stealing the occasional glance at Jack. Word of the duel had spread beyond Dusty Creek, and now every stranger who wandered in looked at him like he was some kind of outlaw hero. Jack didn't feel like a hero. His right hand still ached from the recoil, and his ears rang from the echo of the shot. More than that, the weight of 3 ranches, and everything they meant, felt heavier than ever. Silas sat at the end of the bar, sipping coffee instead of whiskey. You should ride out and check the fences, he said. Word is, someone's been cutting wire on the south pasture. Jack grunted. Wouldn't surprise me. This whole thing started over land. It'll end over land. He spent the afternoon riding from one property to the next. The south pasture was just as Silas had said. 2 posts knocked over, wire coiled and tossed aside. The east spread needed repairs to the creek gate. On the rocky highland, he found nothing wrong except the wind and the endless view. Back in town, Amos Tate stopped him on the street. Heard you stood your ground yesterday, Amos said. Good for you, but now folks are wondering, are you a saloon keeper who owns land or a rancher who owns a saloon? Jack didn't answer right away. The truth was, he didn't know yet. Owning land wasn't just about holding paper deeds, it was about working it, protecting it, and making something worth the trouble. That night, after the saloon closed, Jack sat alone at a table, papers spread out in front of him. He ran the numbers, considered the repairs, and weighed his options. Selling would be easy, cash in hand, no more headaches. But something about that felt like walking away from a fight he'd already won. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and let out a low chuckle. I just wanted a drink, he muttered to himself. Now I'm figuring out grazing schedules. Outside, the street was empty, the dust settling under a pale moon. Jack knew the trouble wasn't over. Rusty and Cole weren't the forgiving kind. But for now, the deeds were his, the saloon was standing, and tomorrow was another day to decide which man he was going to be. The following week brought a strange sort of calm to Dusty Creek. No gunshots, no midnight visitors, no new threats scrawled on scraps of paper. Jack almost found it suspicious. Trouble in this town didn't just vanish. It usually circled like a buzzard until it found something to pick at. In the mornings, he rode out to the ranches, getting a feel for each piece of land. The south pasture, with its rolling grass and scattered cottonwoods, would take the most work to keep secure. The east spread, with its creek and fertile soil, could be a gold mine if managed right. The highland property, though rocky and stubborn, offered a vantage point that made Jack think about more than cattle. It made him think about security. Back in town, the offers kept coming. Amos Tate tried again, this time doubling his price for the south pasture. Jasper Lowe hinted at a loan that a man in your position would be smart to take. Even Sarah, the dressmaker, suggested he sell one property and invest in something less dangerous than land. Jack listened to all of them, but didn't commit. At night, he'd sit in the saloon after closing, sketching rough plans on scraps of paper, fence lines, supply routes, ideas for hiring ranch hands. Silas sometimes joined him, offering advice in that dry way of his. "You're thinking like a man who's staying," Silas said one night. "Maybe I am," Jack replied. "These ranches, I didn't plan for them, but maybe they're exactly what I needed." The more he thought about it, the more sense it made. Owning land meant stability. And in a place like Dusty Creek, stability was a rare luxury. It also meant responsibility, which Jack had never asked for but was starting to accept. By the end of the week, he'd made up his mind. He wasn't selling, not now, maybe not ever. Instead, he'd invest in repairs, hire good people, and make the land pay for itself. Of course, he knew Rusty and Cole were still out there, somewhere past the edge of the horizon, nursing their grudges. But that was fine. Jack Malloy had faced worse odds before, and now, for the first time in a long while, he had something worth defending. The evening was slow, the kind Jack used to think of as perfect. The saloon's lamps glowed warm, casting soft light over half-empty tables. Outside, the wind carried the faint smell of rain from somewhere far off. Jack stood behind the bar, polishing a glass out of habit more than necessity. A few regulars sat in their usual spots, talking in low voices. Silas occupied the far corner, his hat tipped back, watching the room like he always did. The quiet was easy, comfortable, something Jack had learned not to take for granted. The front doors creaked open, and a stranger walked in. Tall, lean, dust on his boots from a long ride. He ordered a whiskey, then leaned on the bar. "You Jack Malloy?" "That's what it says on the deeds," Jack said. The man grinned. "Heard you own 3 ranches now. Folks say you got 'em all in one night over a card game." Jack poured his drink, sliding it across. "Folks say a lot of things." The stranger tilted his head. "So, how'd it really happen?" Jack paused, letting the question hang in the air. He thought about that night. The laughter, the bad bets, the ink drying on those papers. He thought about the duel, the trouble, the long rides across his new land. Finally, he smirked. "Sit down, friend. You buy the next round, and I'll tell you the whole story." As the man took a seat, Jack glanced toward Silas, who gave the faintest nod. Outside, the street was quiet, but Jack knew it wouldn't stay that way forever. Trouble had a way of finding him. Still, for now, he had the saloon, the land, and just enough luck to keep both. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.